Roger Chillingworth serves as the primary antagonist in Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter, functioning as the embodiment of cold intellect divorced from human compassion. Bent in body and warped by a lingering, vengeful obsession, he is a man who traded the warm vitality of human fellowship for the cold, sterile mechanics of dark science and bitter retribution. Having been captured by Native Americans and detained in the wilderness before his arrival in Boston, Chillingworth re-enters civilization physically altered, his figure slightly deformed, mirroring the internal warping of his soul. His decision to conceal his true identity as Hester Prynne's husband allows him to operate within the community undetected, positioning him as a psychological leech upon the Reverend Arthur Dimmesdale. Chillingworth's villainy is distinct because it is intellectualized and methodical rather than passionate or overtly violent. He represents a perversion of the rational mind, utilizing his medical skills not to heal, but to probe the deepest recesses of Dimmesdale's guilt-ridden psyche. Hawthorne carefully constructs Chillingworth as a figure who represents a violation of the human heart. He attempts to usurp the divine prerogative of judgment by acting as both torturer and executioner. Ultimately, Chillingworth's character arc demonstrates the corrosive effects of harboring resentment. He becomes a fiend, self-described, whose existence is entirely dependent upon the suffering of another. And he withers away completely once his victim escapes him through confession and death, having destroyed his own humanity in the pursuit of retribution. To peer into the shadowed heart of Roger Chillingworth is to witness the devastating alchemy of a soul consumed by betrayal. When he steps ashore and discovers his young wife standing upon the scaffold bearing the scarlet mark of her transgression, the foundation of his humanity fractures. The agony of abandonment and the searing humiliation of public cuckoldry strike deep, igniting a raw, primal hunger for retribution. In this initial, agonizing moment of exposure, the instinct to demand a reckoning is profoundly human. The social contract of his era and the raw wound of his private grief offer a grim, understandable prologue to his anger. As the narrative unfurls, Chillingworth steps far beyond the boundaries of righteous indignation into the chilling realm of calculated sadism. Rather than seeking a swift, transparent justice or freeing himself from a fractured union, he chooses a path of prolonged psychological vivisection, sinking his roots into Arthur Dimmesdale's tormented conscience like a parasite. This systematic poisoning of another human soul reveals that his actions are no longer merely about redressing a wrong. They have curdled into an obsessive, self-consuming crusade. By becoming the very architect of torment, Chillingworth strips himself of any true justification, proving that vengeance, once nurtured into a dark art, ultimately destroys the avenger long before it reaches its target. The psychological landscape of Roger Chillingworth, where personal betrayal festers into an all-consuming obsession with another's ruin, finds a chillingly familiar reflection in the architecture of modern digital culture, particularly within the realms of cancel culture, online harassment, and public shaming. Just as the scholar methodically stalked Arthur Dimmesdale's hidden torment from the shadows, modern internet vigilantes often hide behind anonymity to conduct prolonged, digital witch hunts, treating the perceived moral failures of others as an open invitation to inflict systematic psychological distress under the guise of accountability. This contemporary vengeance culture mirrors Chillingworth's descent. What frequently begins as a justified grievance or a reaction to wrongdoing rapidly devolves into a toxic spectacle where the avenger derives a perverse sense of righteousness from another person's prolonged suffering. By weaponizing exposure and denying the possibility of redemption, today's digital executioners mirror the tragic irony of Hawthorne's antagonist, ultimately corroding their own empathy and humanity, while convincing themselves they are serving the forces of justice. To break this cycle of bitterness and preserve our shared humanity, we can choose the radical path of practicing restorative empathy, actively resisting the impulse to weaponize others' mistakes, choosing instead to address harm with a commitment to accountability, grace, and emotional healing rather than cruel retribution. Chillingworth's captivity among the Native Americans, prior to his arrival in Boston, serves as a crucial narrative device that fundamentally alters his character from a detached scholar into a vengeful, almost demonic figure. During his time in the wilderness, he is initiated into savage practices, a term used within the novel's specific cultural context to denote a fusion of natural science and dark, alchemical arts. This experience strips away his remaining civilized European restraints, replacing them with a primitive, almost supernatural understanding of herbalism and psychology. When he re-emerges, he is physically deformed, mirroring the internal corruption that has taken root. This backstory establishes him not just as a wronged husband, but as an agent of the untamed, unforgiving wilderness, giving him the otherworldly insight and ruthlessness necessary to conduct his prolonged psychological torture of Arthur Dimmesdale. For the book, this history provides a necessary Gothic element, allowing Chillingworth to operate as a leech who combines intellectual precision with a dark, intuitive understanding of the human soul that frightens even the town elders. Historically, the inclusion of this captivity reflects the Puritan colonists' deep-seated fear of the heathen forest and its inhabitants, whom they viewed as agents of the devil. By aligning Chillingworth with this perceived darkness, Hawthorne deepens the novel's moral complexity. The villain is not a product of the civilized town, but of the wild frontier beyond its borders. For modern readers, this element serves as a stark reminder of how isolation and exposure to trauma, the very things Chillingworth endured in captivity, can warp the human psyche, transforming a rational man into a monster consumed by the need for retributive justice rather than grace.
Roger Chillingworth is, in many respects, the most intellectually fascinating character in the Scarlet Letter. Hester Prynne suffers. Arthur Dimmesdale sins. Pearl grows. But Chillingworth transforms. Hawthorne is less interested in showing us a man who is born evil than a man who becomes evil through a single consuming passion: revenge. I would argue that Roger Chillingworth is not the novel's villain in the conventional sense. He is something more tragic, and perhaps more frightening. Hawthorne presents him as a warning about what happens when an intelligent, disciplined man allows one emotion to eclipse every other part of his humanity. When we first meet Chillingworth, he is hardly monstrous. Hawthorne describes him as an elderly scholar whose life has been devoted to books rather than people. His physical appearance immediately reflects imbalance. One shoulder sits higher than the other, suggesting that nature itself has marked him as asymmetrical. Yet Hawthorne never implies that his deformity causes his moral corruption. Instead, the physical imperfection foreshadows an inner life that is also incomplete. He has spent decades accumulating knowledge of medicine, knowledge of chemistry, knowledge of ancient learning, knowledge of human nature. But wisdom? That is another matter entirely. His marriage to Hester was itself a mistake born from intellectual arrogance. He believed that affection could be manufactured through gratitude and reason. He openly admits as much. This confession is remarkably honest. He tells Hester that he wronged her. That single admission reveals something important. Roger Chillingworth is capable of self-awareness. He knows he bears responsibility. This alone separates him from a purely evil character. One of Hawthorne's greatest achievements is allowing every major character to possess genuine insight. Hester understands her own passion. Dimmesdale understands his own weakness. Even Chillingworth understands his own failure. He recognizes that he married a woman far younger than himself. He recognizes that he asked for love he had no right to expect. He recognizes that he neglected the emotional side of life in favor of scholarship. This is not the language of a fool, nor is it the language of a psychopath. Initially, he seeks only one thing: to know the identity of Hester's lover. That desire is understandable. Many readers, even today, might sympathize with it. After all, he has returned from years of absence to discover his wife publicly shamed while another man hides safely within society. Justice seems reasonable. Revenge does not. The tragedy is that Chillingworth slowly loses the ability to distinguish between the two. The pivotal moment occurs not when he discovers Dimmesdale. It occurs when he decides not to expose him. This decision changes everything. Why? Because public justice would have ended the story. Instead, Chillingworth chooses private punishment. He becomes judge, jury, executioner, and scientist. Dimmesdale ceases to be a human being. He becomes an experiment. Hawthorne repeatedly uses medical imagery because Chillingworth is conducting a psychological dissection rather than offering treatment. He studies guilt the way a botanist studies flowers, only this flower is slowly dying beneath his microscope. One of the novel's greatest ironies is that Chillingworth is a physician. Doctors exist to restore life. Instead, Chillingworth nourishes disease. Medicine becomes manipulation, healing becomes surveillance, compassion becomes curiosity. Instead of asking, "How may I save this man?" he asks, "How deeply can guilt destroy him?" That single shift transforms his profession into something almost demonic. Hawthorne occasionally compares Chillingworth to Satan. Many readers stop there, but Hawthorne's devil is not the devil of horror films. He is closer to Milton's Satan, not merely evil. Intellect divorced from love. Notice what disappears from Chillingworth's personality. Joy, wonder, humor, friendship, hope. Everything human gradually evaporates. Only intellect remains. His enormous intelligence no longer serves truth. It serves obsession. Perhaps the most brilliant psychological insight in the novel is this: Chillingworth's revenge destroys Chillingworth more completely than Dimmesdale. Dimmesdale, despite years of torment, eventually confesses. He experiences release. Hester rebuilds her identity. Pearl inherits wealth and enters life transformed. Only Chillingworth cannot recover. His identity depends entirely upon another man's suffering. The instant Dimmesdale dies, Chillingworth has no reason to exist. Within a year, he too dies. That is extraordinarily significant. He was not living, he was feeding. Modern readers often describe Chillingworth as vampire-like. Not literally. Emotionally. He feeds on hidden guilt. He grows stronger as Dimmesdale weakens. He appears healthier while the minister deteriorates. This dynamic resembles emotional parasitism. Without Dimmesdale's secret, there is no Chillingworth. His life becomes dependent upon another person's misery. Is he pure evil? I don't believe Hawthorne wants us to answer yes. Pure evil rarely possesses self-awareness. Pure evil rarely admits fault. Pure evil rarely begins with understandable motives. Chillingworth begins as an injured husband. His pain is legitimate. His humiliation is genuine. His desire for truth is reasonable. The corruption lies not in those feelings, but in refusing to let them end. Justice has limits. Revenge does not. Perhaps no one understands Chillingworth better than Hester. Years after his arrival, she tells him something remarkable. She says he has become a fiend. Notice the wording. Not that he always was one, he became one. Transformation is the key. Hawthorne repeatedly suggests that people construct their own souls through repeated choices. Chillingworth chooses revenge every day. Eventually, there is little else left. Chillingworth functions as Dimmesdale's mirror image. Dimmesdale turns suffering inward. Chillingworth turns suffering outward. Dimmesdale punishes himself. Chillingworth punishes another. Neither response is healthy. One collapses beneath guilt. The other loses his humanity through vengeance. Together, they represent opposite extremes of unconfessed sin. Toward the novel's end, Hawthorne describes Chillingworth in language that suggests something has altered beyond morality itself. He is no longer merely angry. He appears transformed into an intelligence devoted exclusively to another man's destruction. This is why Hawthorne repeatedly invokes imagery of leeches, herbs, poison, and hidden roots. The physician who once searched nature for remedies now searches it for instruments of domination. His soul has become botanical. Everything is cultivated toward one poisonous bloom. If Hester teaches us that shame can be survived, if Dimmesdale teaches us that concealed guilt consumes the soul, then Roger Chillingworth teaches something equally profound. Hatred can become an identity. That may be the most terrifying lesson in the novel. Hawthorne suggests that evil is not always committed in a single dramatic act. More often, it grows quietly through repeated acts of fixation until the original wound is no longer visible beneath the habits it has produced. In the end, Roger Chillingworth is not simply a wronged husband or even a villain. He is a man who allowed justice to harden into vengeance, vengeance into obsession, and obsession into the organizing principle of his entire existence. Hawthorne's deepest insight is that Chillingworth does not lose his soul in one catastrophic moment. He surrenders it piece by piece. That slow moral erosion is what makes him one of the most psychologically convincing antagonists in American literature.